into LinkedIn. So let's see how we go. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, LinkedIn Live. Good morning, if you can hear us. I was just saying to Lewis off in the green room, as they call it, it's not green, this room, that there's often a delay sort of connecting into LinkedIn at the moment, I've noticed. So good morning if you are watching us live. Please put a good morning in the comments if you're watching us live. Let us know where you are. Let us know maybe what the weather's like. Is it grey and gloomy? Lewis, you look as though you got a bit of sun on you.
Got a bit of sun, yeah. It's nice.
Yeah. Good morning, Lewis Hackney. Lewis, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Super excited for this conversation. Bit of a touchy one, I guess, but it'll be fun to get into.
Oh, don't stop poking the bear already, Lewis. We're only like 30 seconds in or something.
It'll be good. I'll be good.
For anybody that doesn't know Lewis Hackney, please give Lewis Hackney a follow on LinkedIn. Because he does put out some really interesting stuff. And I think there was a post of yours a couple of days ago, or it might have been a couple of weeks ago actually, where all of your posts, I have to really think before I comment. First of all, I have to think, do I want to comment? And then I have to really think about what I want to say. That's good. That's the sign of a good post, right? It's thought-provoking. It's not your obvious, oh, I just obviously agree with that, or I necessarily obviously disagree. They really get people thinking. Do you have to put a lot of thought into your posts? Just curious.
Yeah, I try to. Well, one thing that I really focus on my posts is keeping them short and succinct. So the sentence structure sort of really makes you sort of get into a rhythm and read them, which may get people worked up, which is why you maybe want to get to comment straight away and start to put something down. No, I'm cautious on what I'm saying because it's a fine line that I'm treading, because I don't disagree with things. I just want to get my point across. And when you're doing that, you need to sort of step the line a little bit, and that's sort of what the idea is. I want to get a different view across, and that usually requires a bit of polarization.
Amazing. So Lewis Hackney, for anybody that doesn't know, Lewis Hackney works in this space around men and masculinity. So he's recently co-founded an organization called the Foundry CIC. But some of you might have come across Lewis from his podcast, which is the Truuman Podcast, or you might pronounce it Truman, but Truuman. But I'm so used to the Truman Show that I call it Truman. But the Truuman Podcast, which has been going for quite a few years actually. I listened to the episode that you did the other day because I saw a post that you did around low testosterone levels, and I thought, that's interesting. It's not something we talk about very often. And I think that's one of the things that I really like about you, Lewis, and your content. You're putting a lot of things out there that probably aren't talked about very often, and or coming from a perspective that we don't often hear. And I think that's really important. This is Lewis Hackney. So good morning if you're watching us live. If you're watching us on the replay, thank you so much for joining us. If you are live, please do say good morning to Lewis as well. So Lewis, just tell us, how did you get into this space? Why masculinity? Why redefining masculinity?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my story is not uncommon with men. I used to live in London pre-pandemic. I think the pandemic is a lot of turning points for a lot of people for conversations, for sure. But I was running a marketing agency, relatively successful. And during the pandemic, that sort of disappeared and changed and twisted into something else. And as part of that, I left London and moved back up north to Manchester and started working on another project, which unfortunately failed, as business does. That's just life. But essentially, I was in a pretty dark place. I was in Manchester. I was no job, no business, nothing to sort of do. And I was basically a bit of a shell of a man. And it was hard for me. I will admit I had some really dark thoughts, which I've shared openly on other posts. But and I decided to make a change. And as part of that, it was more of an exploration. It was like, are more men going through this? Am I the only one? How do I get better? What is mental health? Which is a weird thing to say when you're 30. And then, I started a podcast more as therapy for myself. anyone who would listen and anyone who wanted to talk. And it was just about getting men to talk initially. And through that, I found that men don't just want to talk, they also want to do. So that's sort of where it all sort of stemmed from, was a self-discovery, a self issue in life that sort of led me down the garden path. And like you say, 2.5 years of podcasting, I'm here now.
Yeah, and interestingly, somewhat maybe provocatively in the title of this, I put masculine energy. So it just so happened that I think the week that that I was going to schedule this, obviously, Zuckerberg came out with the masculine energy thing, which we may or may not get into. But obviously, one of the things that you talk about is redefining masculinity. So what is it about? Why do you think there's even a need to redefine it? Why does it need to be redefined?
I think there's a huge gap for men, full stop. I think right now is arguably the best time to be a man. Now, some people might be like, whoa, what about the patriarchy and all the 50s when a firm handshake got you head of finance? But this is genuinely, in my opinion, the best time to be a man. We have all of the conversations around women going into STEM, women empowerment, women getting into careers and all of these things. And what that actually means for men is the same. It means we can explore fatherhood. It means we can explore heal. It means we can explore creative roles that weren't necessarily linked to men in the past. So as an example, I used to work in finance. Now I do a podcast. Like, that would not be a normal thing to do in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. So for me, it's the best time to be a man.
Right. You mentioned an acronym there, which is HEAL, HEAL. Just explain what that is for people that are maybe watching this that haven't read Richard Reeves or haven't come across the term HEAL. Just explain what that is for people.
Yeah, so HEAL is the idea for sort of more softer professions. So healthcare, education. You're really testing me now. I'm not too sure what A and L are, but maybe you can help me out. But essentially, it's those sort of professions that may have been traditionally seen for women, and in most cases still are predominantly dominated by women, because there is no conversation around getting men into those roles.
Absolutely. I'm trying to remember what that is. It's either administrative or it might be arts, maybe. And I think L is maybe literacy, I want to say, or something like that.
Yes, I believe that will be directionally correct.
Yes. And interestingly, the H in particular, which is your healthcare. What are your thoughts around? Because obviously you started with like your own personal journey around exploring mental health and all of that. And we were talking off camera about mental health, and I was saying about supporting family members through mental health challenges as well. What are your experiences of that in terms of whether there are or aren't enough men in that space, and whether that be professionally, in healthcare or therapy services or what, just what are your thoughts about that? And what could we do to get more men into those spaces?
So I think there's a shortage for sure, both on both sides, both professionally and from a personal level. There's still a huge stigma for men. It's changed significantly ever since I got into this space. So that's 2.5 years, which is a short period of time. I've spoken to people that have been in this space for 15 years and they've seen a huge change in this as well. So it is changing slowly. I think, to touch on the masculine energy, one of the big comments around that post was that women have these traits too. And when you look at the opposite side of that, feminine energy, or however you want to term it, men have those traits too. So there are men that are suited for those professions, but there is no conversation about one, it being okay, and two, the pathway for them to get into it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to Savannah. That's just clarified. It's administration and literacy. Thank you, Savannah. You're an absolute star, Savannah Hansen. I was talking to a few weeks ago about the future of DEI and the views of Gen Z, which we'll probably get into actually, because when I was talking to Savannah and Zubaida, we were talking about the different views of Gen Z, we can see that gender divide definitely growing in the younger generations as well. But in terms of the healthcare thing, I want to, just before we move off that, I want to get your thoughts on something. And because I spent some time on an NHS board. I won't go into it too much. But and that was an NHS that looked after mental health care in the community. I've got a real issue with the word nurse. I think it's really unhelpful. I think it's such a gendered word. And I was literally saying, I was like, can we not think of a different word so that it doesn't put men off, and then secondly, there is also this stigma around what the word actually means and the undervaluing of that as a profession, right? I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's a meme, right, where there's a guy looking into like the distance pondering, and it says, "I never thought Dr. Pepper could be a woman. Maybe I'm the problem." So it's sort of like the same sort of concept there. That this doctor's a man and nurse is a woman, but that isn't the case now. And I think we can change. I think changing names and doing that sort of thing is probably where a lot of people have a lot of problems. I think it's more just a conversation of how do you become a nurse. I think male nurse is very like a common trend. I think if you remember Meet the Parents, which is a film with De Niro and Ben Stiller. I think he calls him a male nurse in that, but he's actually he's a midwife, which is even more a dominated profession by women, and he's using that as a negative in that film. So I think it's just removing that bias. So female doctor, male nurse, it's just nurse, police officer, the way that we've neutralized that as well.
Absolutely. And it's an interesting topic, but there is that thing about, getting men into different professions and thinking about the language and whether the language is or isn't helpful, or how we just, as you say, Lewis, almost like just get past the language into what is the need, what is it that we're trying to do. I remember looking at this in terms of like men in healthcare, and when you look at things like, I think the term that's used, I had somebody on here actually talking about men in healthcare, and the term, it's Dudley Sawyer, the term that's used is, for example, intimate care. So where you have, say, for example, carers that go in to look after, say, people that are older in years, or, adults that need additional physical care, etc. There is a benefit, right, in having more men in those spaces, because you have some men particularly would actually prefer to have a man in some of those roles. Anyway, we just assume that it's okay for women to go in and do that for any gender, but actually some men would have a preference and they would rather have a man, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my nana currently has care, and the majority of those are female, but we have a male carer that comes in very sporadically. He's amazing. He's genuinely amazing. He's arguably one of the better ones. So it's I think you need both for both genders, really. It's the same. Same with teaching, right? I think men and boys and girls need men and female teachers. I think both.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And arguably, obviously, for those of you that are listening to this, if you haven't read Richard Reeves' book of Boys and Men, we may well be referencing him, even if we don't mention his name once or twice. And certainly for me, last year, it was my sort of like book of the year that I was recommending to everyone. If you really want to know more about this work of Boys and Men, but a lot of the research that he's done around the importance for boys in particular of having male teachers is it's phenomenal. It really is worth looking into. Let's move into this conversation and why sometimes these conversations are so difficult. So one of the questions I've got is, why do we think that men are feeling unheard? And I say feeling, why are men not being listened to? Or why do you feel that men sometimes aren't listened to, especially around these kinds of topics?
I think simply because of, quote unquote, the patriarchy. It's a word I hate. It's something that don't feel that a lot of men today benefit. I have a sort of another analogy, which is like we always used to look after the old people from a governmental point of view, and they were the ones that fought in the war. They were the ones that gave us our freedom. Whereas some may argue the old people now have had rather an easy time, and it's that side of that is a similar argument. Is like, well, why are they getting all this preferential treatment just because they're old? They've not actually been through any struggles. They've arguably been through the easiest time. So I think there's a lot of that. So it's like get you, which is fair, right? There's a few people in front that have obviously had issues and battles that they've had to do. In gays, like all of these have been battles for sure. Like we're talking like over 125 years for women, and there's still a lot of stigma around certain things, for sure. But I think I had this conversation the other day, actually, which I think is quite pertinent, because I've just seen what International Women's Day's theme is, which is, correct me if I'm wrong.
Is this the official? Is this going to be the official? Because we know, right? There are always these. I always say to people, don't get too bogged down by themes, because there's the official United Nations theme. Is it that one, or is it the more commercial one, the UN one?
So on the website it says accelerate action. Which is
okay. Yeah.
Is that not the official one? Correct me if I'm wrong.
But okay. No, it isn't. But continue. No, it's fine, because a lot of people will be using that theme. So go ahead, Lewis.
Yeah, I think there's an element of I want it now, and I think that's what's putting pressure on men. Is this like we've gone through the legal side of things? So if you were to go through the law book, everything is parity, right? And now it's, for a lot of men, it feels like square peg round hole, and that is them putting pressure on them and putting them into positions that they're not used to, which is fine, but no one's having a conversation with them about why that's happening, what's good for them, what are the changes for them. And it's only now that we're really only starting to have conversations around fatherhood and what that looks like from a paternity point of view. So I think with that side of things, that will start to reduce some of those other pressures, societal, if you will. But I think men don't feel heard because they feel that they're back of the queue, and they feel that a lot of this is now just being forced into where it should be. Yeah,
it's really interesting. So just pulling out a couple of the things that you've said there. First of all, the thing about patriarchy, that was really interesting, because I as you were talking there, I almost thought, so there's a phrase, right, that we don't tend to use now, and most people recognize that it's problematic in and of itself, which is the whole toxic masculinity phrase, right?
Yeah.
Would you say that patriarchy maybe is now the new toxic masculinity, if that makes sense? Right? Does it hold the same kind of like connotations almost?
Yeah, I think it's just replaced it. I think it's I can't really see it as an argument. I don't.
Yeah.
I understand that there was benefit, right?
But
just societally, I just don't think it's there anymore. I really don't.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Good morning, Sophia. Sophia, I think, has summed up what I'm thinking as well. And I'm gonna delve into still what Lewis was saying, but Sophia said, I suppose this is the tension of freedom, justice, and equity. There is going to be a tension between those in power. If we assume sort of patriarchy, and we assume there are still some men at the top of society, right? Obviously, which isn't all men, but there are some men there, and those seeking power, which is those that are underrepresented in the upper echelons. And how do we manage this tension? And I think linking that to what you were saying, Lewis, I think, to sort of summarize, if I've understood this correctly, it's almost for a long time, and still, as I say, at the top, when people look at the top of society and the top of organizations, they see men. So they still assume, oh, you guys have got it good. You've still got it good, right? You're still at the top, You've had it good for so long. I think it was only till I think it was in the 70s and 80s, still in the UK, single women couldn't get a mortgage from some banks and all sorts of things. So a lot of women are still like, no, you men have had it good for a long time. But as you say, things have changed a lot, right, over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We cannot deny this. And this is, I think, is almost like one of the challenges of the work of inclusion and, you know, D&I. Progress has undoubtedly been made, right?
Yeah.
So to your point around, there has been some progress made, but there probably is still this sense out there of, you know, women still need more, you know, we're not quite there. And men, yeah, you may have some problem, but, you know, as you say, you know, get to the back of the queue, because actually there's other groups that have still potentially got a greater need. Does that summarize it, do you think, in terms of what you
Yeah, I
think some of
think.
the issues are?
Yeah, I think men, sort of, to use Sophia's point, see that power side of things. They see it as almost
Yeah.
a transfer of power rather than an equity split of power,
Mm,
which is what
mm,
we were sold, right? Is like it's all about equal. But a lot now
right.
that it's pushing, and it's not taking its natural cause, if you will. Because, like, if you want my opinion, in 50 years, if we just everyone stopped doing what they were doing, and
Yeah.
everyone carried on working based on the way that the rules are now and how society is, it would be pretty fair. Like, it would be the representation that people sort of expect based on a number of other factors, like whether people want to go into those roles altogether.
Yeah.
My opinion on it.
Yeah.
And I think the forcing of these topics and the forcing of these targets, if you will,
Yeah.
obviously Google had removed theirs yesterday, but they still sort of stick around, and there's an element of that. I think the people at the top aren't really bothered. The people that are feeling it are the people in the middle, and they're like, I'm not doing anything.
Yeah. And the men at the bottom, you know, if we really look at this, and we were talking about this before we just came on, but you know, it's there's a quote in Richard Reeve's book which I absolutely love, and he sort of says, I think the quote is something like, just because the feet on the rungs of the ladder at the top of the organization are male doesn't mean that men throughout all of society are thriving, right?
Yeah.
And especially when you start to look intersectionally, you know, as you said, so for men who maybe have disabilities or LGBTQ plus or ethnicity, so the intersection of men with race and class in particular,
Yeah.
they're not necessarily thriving, right? It's not as straightforward as that. So there is something around, I guess, to your point around in terms of, have we done enough, and almost like, should we stop where we are?
Yeah.
There is something about, have some of these measures gone to a place where some of the men who still need additional, you know, support and help, etc., are now being disadvantaged almost, right?
Yeah. I think we're at a very strange crossroads in the fact that if you take the lower economic sort of relationships, they tend to be more traditional. So those women are seeking men that can provide and put in, basically bring food to the table. Yet those men are not going to be able to earn as much. So you're actually seeing a huge gap in marriage there. So it's actually, the more educated someone is, the more likely they are to get married. So there's that side of things, and then there's obviously the huge pressure of that is like this wanting to compete in the mating market, if you will. There's still this. There's a change, right? There's a change in society towards equality. I did a post around dating, but research is still showing, from a, like, arguably a biological level or still a societal, that women prefer men that either A, earn more than them, B, are higher educated than them, or C, just have a higher status. So there's still an element of that within traditional relationships, which is still the majority, right? So
Traditional hetero relationships, and obviously the bit that it needs linking to. So for anybody that hasn't really listened to some of these conversations, and there are some great conversations around this, I want to say, Lewis, I think you got me onto listening to Scott Galloway, who I absolutely love in this space. But those statistics that you quote there around, you know, women's preferences when it comes to dating and finding a mate, etc. One of the reasons that is potentially challenging as well is if you pair that with the statistic around women in education. So, for example, the rate at which women are graduating, right? So the tables turned some, I want to say maybe 20 or so years ago, where now we've got more women graduating than men, really women starting to outstrip men in terms of graduating. Yet, as you say, we have this conundrum where women still want to find a mate that is potentially more educated, earns more, all of those things, which we end up almost like with this mismatch. And then women complaining about the dating pool not being big enough, right? Women are like, what's happened to the dating pool? It's like it's shrinking. Well,
I don't want to get into it too much, but the way that dating is set up right now is perfect for short-term narcissists to succeed. So I mean that's essentially what's been created. Long and short of it. But yeah, maybe that's another life.
Yeah. Well, if you're really interested in the whole like dating thing, I mean, follow any of Lewis's posts, because you will really be you'll really be, Lewis's posts are very thought-provoking, right, is all I would say. But the dating one, and we're not going to go down that rabbit hole because we could be here forever, but the whole question of who should pay on a first date is like, I've been talking about this for years, Lewis, as in like, why do women still want men to pay on a first date? That is not equality. You cannot have it both ways. That is not equality. But there was an interesting post on that. Good morning, Emily. Let me just pull out Emily's question here. One of the challenges I see is that this positive discussion assumes most men would want to see positive change that benefits all people, including them. But I come across men across many different sectors that are not interested in having women in their circle, or they feel that they shouldn't need to adapt or change to be more welcoming for women. Sport is a good example of this. What can we do about this?
Yeah, so this is the nail on the head, right? I think a lot of men are slowly getting things, essentially what they feel taken away from them, right? One of the things that we want to do at the Foundry is we want to create purpose and community through adventure. And it's okay for men to have spaces. It's okay for men to have sectors of society that are for men, and not everything needs to be equal. Take sport, for example, a lot of men, the simple argument for them is they would prefer to watch men in sport, and there's nothing you can do about that. Like, unless you change the biology of humans, there's nothing you can do about that. And the more that you force it, the more you're going to wind them up, and that's where we start to get angry men. That's where we start to get weak men. That's where we start to get men that look to want to increase violence against women and girls, because you're essentially creating hatred. And that's one of the big things that I'm trying to push, is that you want equality, let men be men sometimes, because it's good for them.
and again, if you're interested to delve into or discuss what does that mean, go on to some of like Lewis's posts, and actually, because I think as well you'll see more. It's interesting, we've got a lot of women commenting on this, probably because we have a lot of women watching, you'll see more men discussing it as well, the dialogue from all perspectives, which again I think is really interesting. So let me just circle back on some of the comments here. I've figured out that this is Jill. Good morning, Jill. Our positions on this partly driven by differences in where people stand on bioessentialism. I think that question, is that to do with the mating question, Jill? Maybe just clarify for me. I think it might be to do with that. I want to pull up your point, Jill, around your point, Lewis. I think this ties in with what Sophia was saying around, for example, trying to force men to say, you've got to watch women in sports, for example. Sophia's put here, equity across the board is a challenge. I suppose there is merit in saying making a difference within your sphere of influence. Arguing from a place of personal experience will always have some bias. How do we address these biases when we speak to these issues? I think going to your point, Lewis, around, how do we get men into these conversations, and potentially men that are like, I don't want to watch women in sport. I don't want to watch women's football.
Yeah.
Etc. I mean, I'm not really a sports person anyway, so I don't really want to watch any gender playing football.
Yeah.
That's just where I am, right? And neither should I be forced to. But there is there, Lewis, would you say there's just something around letting men find their own way to these things in and of their own time, and through work like you're doing, and conversations, and other means, rather than being told you must do this, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of men feel they're told to do things. I think I'm more than happy to be corrected on this. I think the majority of people that watch women's sport are men.
Mm-hmm.
They're just men that love sport, but not all men love sport that much that they're going to watch all sport. Exactly to your point. I think men need a bit of an arm's length. They sort of need to be allowed to be men, allowed to have conversations about men, allowed to explore masculinity, allowed to do all of these things. And sure, there's going to be elements of quote unquote toxic masculinity within that. But as a whole, society is shifting, and as a whole, men are significantly better than they were. I think the pressure that they're under now is creating these small pockets of resentment, which are only growing, as we've seen with right-wing politics latching onto these sort of ideas. And that's only going to grow if we continue to push this narrative. I think good men come from having the ability to be a man, have a purpose, have a vision, and are able to be a little bit more autonomous as well. And I think those are the men that want to see women do well. They want to see their daughters, their granddaughters, their aunties, their nieces doing well. But they also want to be able to do well on their own. And I think that for a lot of men is what they thought equality was. But what they feel they're getting is a telling off.
Yeah. And nobody wants to be told off, right? This is one of the nobody wants to be told off, and this is one of the criticisms actually within the DEI space as well around this work, that sometimes it's being couched in a way which is telling people off, of any gender or ethnicity. Nobody wants to come at this work like that. We want to have conversations like this, right, where we can explore, discover, look at the evidence, look at the data, look at people who are influential, who have thought this through, and then kind of work together to get to our own conclusions. People don't just want to be told, you're the problem, this is what you've got to do, sort it out, give some of your toys to other people. Right? Nobody wants to be told that. Right?
Yeah, so I do a bit of work with Staffordshire Uni in regards to their violence against women and girls. So I've spoken at a couple of public lectures on that. And the lady who runs that, she wants to get more men in the room. And I was like, well, the men that you get in the room are never going to commit the crime. You want to leave that to someone else in a byproduct way. So like if a man is busy watching football, like there's an argument that he can't commit violence against women and girls. Like it, to be really simplistic with it. But there's obviously more positive outlets that a man can be doing and exploring. I think Tom's just put a lovely post on there that sort of summarizes that, what I mean from that. But that's my view on it, is if you're telling people, they're either going to get annoyed or they're going to be just like, well, I might as well do it because they've already been told that's what I do.
Yes, that links to, let's just circle back to this question that Jill had around, this is to do with different career choices. So we obviously talked about the HEAL career, so healthcare, education, administration, literacy, etc. So Jill was saying, referring to career choices and what drives the difference, is some of it innate? So is it nature versus nurture, basically? E.g., are there less women in tech because less women innately prefer other careers? Hopefully that makes sense. It makes perfect sense, Jill. Thank you. What are your thoughts on that? And then I'll just add something on that, particularly around the women in STEM bits. What are your thoughts on that, Lewis? Is it, are men in certain careers just because they've got a preference, for example, right?
I think no is the honest answer. I think a lot of men go into the roles that they go into because they're told to go into them. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't go into them. There's a caveat to that. So Richard Reeves, and I've also seen this firsthand with my stepfather, talks about the ease of getting into those sort of healed professions as a second career choice. So he wanted to be a teacher, and he literally is an amazing writer. He reads everything. So short story short, he owns a chip shop because he couldn't become a teacher. He ended up being a teaching assistant because the barriers for him to get there, whereas he would have been a fantastic English teacher because of all of the knowledge that he has. So I think it takes time for men to realize what they want to do. I think it's a bit of a journey, but we just go into the roles that we think we're meant to go into.
Absolutely. And the same, and to Jill's point as well, because Jill mentioned, for example, the example of women in tech, but the piece of data that slightly contradicts that for me in terms of women in STEM. So when you look at countries in the Middle East, like Iran in particular, India, the UAE, the women in STEM graduates, there's more women STEM graduates than male, right? So it's not these things aren't necessarily nature. I think you're absolutely right, Lewis. A lot of it is kind of the things that we're either pushed into, or we see certain role models and we think that's the thing, or there are more barriers, etc. So it's not as simple as
I think just on
like
that,
nature over nature.
just briefly on that, the idea of it being innate or your instinct to do it, I think the side for that's true for males is maybe more manual labor roles. I think that's innate. I think that makes the most sense. But when it comes to technology and having an understanding of it, I don't think that's, or finance, for example, I don't think that has any reason why that's male dominated.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be wrapping up soon. I want to finish on talking about allyship. First of all, the fact that, and you did a post about this, men as allies, the fact that, and it links to what somebody was saying about men in the workplace. The fact that we seem to, especially in the work of D&I, and I can't tell you how many organizations I really push against in terms of what are we doing for men? What are you doing for International Women's? I mean, International Men's Day. I've been saying this for years. Have you got men's networks, etc.? But the pushback that even I get as a professional in this space, you would be shocked. And unfortunately, men are only cast as the allies to other groups, right? So that's the first one. And then I want to finish up with what the rest of what organizations and society and women need to be doing to support men more. So just getting your views first of all on men only being cast as the allies.
I think that quote sums it up perfectly. And I think I can answer your other question with a simple statement, which is I don't think anyone needs to help anyone do anything. I think you just need to facilitate the groups that allow people to be who they want to be. And by doing that, you'll create a more cohesive community, because the people that want to go to those events will go to those events. The people that want to go to their events will go to their events. And guess what? You'll probably run into a lot less arguments and conversations and conflict because they've got too much stuff going on that they're not bothered.
That's a very pragmatic.
Like I know it's almost too simple, right?
It's a very pragmatic approach. And interesting, I was having a conversation with Daniele Fiandaca, who we both know, and when we were talking about things like men's networks and groups, etc., in organizations. Now think about this. One of the challenges sometimes in organizations with things like employee networks is they can become siloed, right? But actually, sometimes, and I was talking about this, sometimes for certain networks, at times they need those closed safe spaces. It kind of depends on the maturity of where the organization is, where the group is, what the need is, but there is benefit to having sometimes those closed spaces. As the networks then mature, and I see this, it almost happens naturally. As the networks start to mature, they start to work more across each other, they start to collaborate more, they have conversations like this, they start to let other people in. It does kind of just happen naturally once they feel heard, they've been given the space to kind of talk these things through. Do you know what I mean? I don't know whether that resonates with you at all, Lewis.
No, it really does. I think there's a again, not to just simplify it, but there's a really like old saying, which is if everyone put their problems in a pile, you'd be in a rush to get yours back. Like everyone is going through something, and to put men in a position of like, well, you need to support us. Well, it's like, well, hang on, I do have like other things to think about. Like I've got kids at home, I've got a wife that I need to take on dates and that I need to do X, Y, and Z with. Like, with all due respect, your problems are your problems. Like, you can go and have your space, that's fine. But like, and if I have time and I want to be part of that, I will. But I do have my own stuff going on. So trying to force me into a helper when I've already got my own stuff going on is never going to be. We're all selfish deep down.
Yeah, and the point that you make as well, actually, I think is about recognizing individuals. And I mean, we haven't got time enough today to get into the whole topic of privilege, but recognizing that whether you believe that as a group that there are privileges that come as a result of being part of a group, right? We can have that discussion, but still within that you have individuals that are going through individual things. And yes, you may have some individuals that at times have got the time and the energy to support others, right? And that's how they work, etc. But as Lewis is saying, at times you're going to have individuals that have got a lot of stuff going on, and they maybe haven't got the time, the energy, and or the motivation to be in that role. Do you know what I mean? It swings and roundabouts, right? This is life. It's give and take, right?
Yeah. No, yeah, for sure. I completely agree. We spoke about this before, right? That we could go on too many tangents. It's a huge topic. It's vast. There's no answer. But thank you so much for facilitating this conversation.
No, thank you so much,
that you're willing to listen, right? I think that's probably the biggest part of it.
Yeah, well, listening, change starts with listening and talking, right? Talking and listening. So thank you so much, Lewis, for joining this conversation. Honestly, anyone that doesn't follow Lewis, please do. You know, if you want to continue the conversations around men and masculinity, and why wouldn't we, right? Because there's a lot of talk around, other high-profile individuals, and I won't say the name to kind of give them the credit, but we need to give more support to people that are having different types of conversations around masculinity. And Lewis, and through the work that he's doing at the Foundry, is one of the people doing that. So please do follow Lewis and kind of get involved in this dialogue and this debate. So thank you all for joining us this morning. If you joined us live, thank you everyone, and if you're watching on the replay, thank you for taking some time out of your day to watch this. Lewis, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much. And please DM me if you want to continue the conversation. Always up for
absolutely. Perfect. All right, thanks, Lewis. Everyone have a great weekend. Take care.